Good to see everyone. Father Ian Van Heusen here with Alana Burke.
Yeah.
Alana.
Welcome everyone for the 31st Sunday in Ordinary Time, where we review the readings for the Mass and sometimes go down rabbit trails and sometimes stick on topic. You never know. You got to stick around, find out. So how are you doing, Father?
Doing well. I'm at my parents' house. Spending today through tomorrow with them, and then got to get back on tomorrow night. But cool. Let's jump in.
Yeah. All right. First reading from Deuteronomy. Moses spoke to the people, saying, "Fear the Lord your God, and keep throughout the days of your lives all his statutes and commandments which I enjoin on you, and thus have long life. Hear then, Israel, and be careful to observe them, that you may grow and prosper the more, in keeping with the promise of the Lord, the God of your fathers, to give you a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Therefore, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. Take to heart these words, which I enjoin on you today."
Cool. So we're going to hear about this in connection with the first reading. I'm trying to think if we should the gospel. The first reading in line with the gospel. I'll start with the thing that's most obvious instead of trying to wait. So does this mean that we don't need any rules, that we don't need any structures, and we can just love and that suffices, right? Because that's what we're going to hear in the gospel, according to some people, right? We're going to hear that all you need is love, like that Beatles song. All you need is love. Do. So what are your thoughts?
And all the statutes.
Yeah.
I think that's a overlooked part of maybe this reading. To keep throughout all the days of your lives all his statutes and commandments.
Well, so I think I got a good analogy. Okay. So let's talk about soccer sports, right?
Oh,
okay,
go sports.
So you have lots of rules in sports. You have different laws. You have different positions. The game is fulfilled in scoring goals, right? So what's the problem with the scribes and the Pharisees that we hear in today's gospel? It'd be like if a soccer player came to the sideline and said, "Coach, I didn't use my hands just like you taught me. I kicked the ball." And the coach is like, "But you didn't score any goals. You missed like the most important part. Like, yes, do all those things, but realize that the whole game is fulfilled in scoring goals.
You kicked the ball the wrong direction."
Exactly.
Like, you didn't even know where the goal was.
Exactly. Like the little kids. You scored on your own goal versus,
right. So there's all these things, but the thing that fulfills them and the things that makes them possible is
following. If you don't follow the rest of the rules, then you won't score goals. Yeah. Like they're lower, but they're not they're not the ends. They're the means to the end.
Mm-hmm. So hierarchy doesn't nullify lower things.
Exactly. That would be a good way of putting it. Like it's like a hierarchy.
Mm-hmm. But love is important, right? But we misunderstand love in that way.
Well, let's also define, what do we mean by love? Do we mean animal love? Do we mean like our raw instincts, or like do we mean just like our just being attracted towards the good, like emotional things? Or do we mean, we're breaking up a little bit, hopefully it's not cutting out. Or do we mean willing the good of another? Because sometimes willing the good of another is not necessarily making them feel good, right? Sometimes you do things for people, doing what's best for them, and they don't like it and they don't enjoy it.
Right. And there's always discernment around those things, right? Because some people can get it wrong doing things that people don't necessarily enjoy, and it doesn't always end in their good. So we have to be careful and discern on all those things. But I think it's important because he really states it in here about all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. Like, what does that mean? Like, what was he trying to tell us in that?
Well, I think one of the challenges with correct and beautiful action. Okay, there is no law that will tell you how to make the perfect picture, the perfect painting, the perfect song. There is no law that will lead you to that level of excellence. To reach that level of excellence with something, it's almost like you have to have an intuitive grasp of something new, something beautiful, right? Because a lot of times, if you like, we've all experienced this where they have like a hit song or whatever, and somebody just makes like a version of it, and it doesn't even feel the same because it's like it's a counterfeit almost,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or you see that, you're like, oh, that's the exact same, you just ripped off of this other person. So to
Mm-hmm.
make a truly exciting song, let's take music for example, it's bringing forth something new for which
Mm-hmm.
there is no law, but it depends on laws, right? There's laws undergirding it. There's laws of music. There's laws of
Mm-hmm.
rhythm.
There's something that helps it transcend the perfection of the laws that it stands on, right? It
Yeah,
helps elevate it past the doing the things correctly, right? Like music is very mathematical, and there's things that sound good to people, right? And there's tones that help people, but there's more than that, and the beauty and all the transcendent goods really are what speak to us.
yeah,
And how do we use that towards God? How do we lift our hearts and our souls and use all of our strength to love the Lord, right?
yeah,
So
exactly. And you would never say that a musician can ignore all those lower laws and just, like, you would never say to a musician, just make an awesome song. Just make an awesome
just do
song. It's
it.
that easy. Just
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
Right. No, there's a
Don't
whole
use any
spectrum.
rules.
Don't use any rules. Just do it spontaneously of your own initiative with no training, no discipline. If I just leave you alone in a room with a guitar, you'll become the Beatles eventually. That's how people treat the moral life, right?
Yeah. And like, oh, well, I tried that once.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, oh, yeah, that doesn't make a habit. That doesn't make virtue. It doesn't do anything except for you tried it once, right? And that's just like, I tried guitar once and I sucked. Well, okay.
Everybody always,
Yeah.
and there's like 1 in a million that might be okay when they first pick it up, but
Yeah. There's some people with very raw natural talent, but that's what it is. It's raw. It's still not a transcendent good, right? It's
exactly.
not good, beautiful, and true. Those things rest on the natural law, right?
Yeah.
So
That's how a lot of people treat the moral life. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just gonna live my life. It's like, I'm gonna have my guitar in the house. I'll look at it every day, and then by the time I'm older, I'll figure out how to play it magically.
I'm like looking right now, just like looking at my treadmill, like
Exactly.
one day
I
I'll
I
just
got
be
the Bible. I
inspired.
got the rosary in my house. I got the Bible. When I
Yeah,
have enough time, I'll pray.
right. And I'll be great at it first time. Because I've been thinking about it, and like it's been telling me these things this whole time, right?
Yeah,
That's how that
exactly.
works. So
Yeah.
it doesn't. It actually takes hard work and dedication and some blood, sweat, and tears. You know?
I guess the question then is, so I see this. Have you ever heard the book Essentialism? Have you ever seen that?
It
It's like a
sounds
business
familiar.
literature, but I mean, it's probably, I don't know if it was a popular business book. I read it, but it talked about focusing on what's essential.
Okay.
Pretty easy
That sounds
concept.
self-explanatory. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty easy concept. A lot of business literature is, but there is something about business literature that it's very simple, complex, simple ideas. But it does. I think it is helpful for people who are in business because they don't necessarily need complex ideas. They need simple ideas that they have to be reminded of. But that's another subject. But
Yeah.
anyways, so going with essentialism is, I see it. If you're in a parish, the problem with the scribes and the Pharisees becomes very apparent because, and I have to be careful how much I talk about this. Our parish is not, St. Peter's doesn't go through this, but I've seen parishes that go through this where they get so wrapped around the axles about so many policies and procedures and all these things that are not essential. And, if you ask like your typical parish secretary, what is the most important thing we do here? Or what's the most important part of your job?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if she would say to love God and love my neighbor. She might say,
Mm.
well, I really got to keep the paperwork in order. And that's
Right.
that's the mentality, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the mentality. Is like, what is essential? Like,
Yeah.
and,
Interesting, because that makes me think of, military days and working in the chapel. And that's literally what I heard all the time. What's mission essential?
Yeah.
What's mission essential? Those things are most important. Those things are what we need to focus on. What's mission essential? And mass was mission essential. So like, at least we had that focus that mass was necessary. So I definitely think it's an interesting way to think about it. And, and maybe that is a good thought to think every day, like, what's essential spiritually, right? Like, am I putting God first?
Well, I mean, I have a poll on this. I'm going to throw my sister under the bus right now. My sister's the worst offender in this case. Is I constantly get people who try to pull me away from things that I view are essential, right? So my sister walks in, she notices every little detail that's off in the buildings, and why is this? Why is that? Why is that? And I know, and I don't say this to her. Maybe I should at times. I know that many times the reason why a lot of these details don't get done is because I'm focused on other things that I consider more essential. And so I prioritize. And the thing that's always hard to explain to people when they walk into Newman is we've been in continuously renovating it now for 5 years, continuously. There's like, and it feels like it's like a never end. I mean, we're getting to the point where it's in pretty good shape right now. But I mean, it has been, somebody walks in, they're like, well, why is that light been off? I'm like, yeah, all of the things that we've been fixing, like I just dropped that detail, And I've had to explain to my sister, there's 1,000 little details like this in my life that I could attend to, but then I would not be available like emotionally for crises, other things like that.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, if they notice it, then they can fix it. Like, well, that is a great thing for you to volunteer and do.
Well, to be fair to my sister, she does do that.
No, not her, but
so she's a good. Exactly. She's a good worker.
I know she works hard.
She's coming back in a couple of weeks to do some more stuff. She's done a lot of stuff too. Sylvia's done a lot too. No, I'm really grateful for them around me, but just the challenge is that in life, you always have people, and not that my sister does this in a dramatic way, but they're always trying to pull you in different ways, especially as a priest, and trying to, and it's hard to explain to sometimes, like, discerning what is essential.
What are you paying attention to, right? Like, what is your attention going to, and how do you discern like the priority, right? And sometimes little things need to be left off for a little while, right? So that your attention can be what's on the most important, right? On God, on caring for the students, on the things that are necessary for, right? The priest is necessary for certain things.
Exactly. And that's a conversation I've had with many people where I'm like, a priest could attend to some of these details, but then what would they have to sacrifice, right? Like, and then I had to tell myself, and I have to remind my staff of all the things I could do. And the beauty and the challenge of priesthood is there's always more things you can do. Like, it's never ending. I mean, really, you can be as busy or as not busy as you want. You kind of make your own schedule.
Right. And you could do that, but would you have to sacrifice like spiritual direction or confession or something that only you can do in that space? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And that's where the hard conversation.
Well, most people don't understand it, so I don't even bother. I mean, just kind of just suck it up. Like, thanks for the feedback. Move on.
Well,
go
ahead.
Because there've been so many situations where it's like, yes, hypothetically, well, and I'm going to reveal a little bit, like, hypothetically, like, I could set up and break down for every single mass. Then an hour obligation becomes a 3-hour obligation. Then I've noticed one of the things that's hard to express to people is when you're not at your best, like, there's like a ripple effect. If you're walking into mass frazzled as a priest and not recollected, then the people aren't recollected. They're not nourished because that energy kind of,
you can feel the energy. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that sounds kind of new agey, a little hippie-ish, but there's truth in it. And then you're not recollected. So your homily doesn't have that flavor of the Holy Spirit. People aren't nourished.
Mm-hmm.
They give less. And then you're having to do more to catch up with the fact that you
Mm-hmm.
have less. And it's
Yeah.
just like,
Yeah.
And that's part of the challenge of,
negative feedback loop.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of it, the thing I've also realized, going back to this idea of, well, what's the fulfillment of the law? The fulfillment of the law is love. One of the things that can be really difficult, I think, for any organizations is sometimes it's untangible things that nobody can put their finger on that are the biggest improvements and the biggest things that excite. Because I've noticed with Newman, little changes will have these incredible positive effects. You'll just see things kind of multiplying in kind of intuitive ways that you can't put your finger on directly, and nobody could explain directly, but it's just because the whole thing's moving in a positive way.
Right. Well,
Whereas,
also you guys are changing the whole surroundings,
yeah,
and people actually, it's not new age, it's not woo-woo. People actually respond to their surroundings. It's not necessarily conscious, a lot of it's unconscious, but if they feel better in the space that they're in, they'll respond better. And it's even like what we're doing in our house right now is just repainting all of the gray, because even with my husband, who's a retired vet, he responds so much better to color and to not gray, and so life is just easier when we're not dealing with that. So it's oh, well, that's an easy thing to change, which is paint. So that's what we're doing.
I tell you, the biggest change I've made recently is when I'm tired and stressed, in the afternoon, or I'm really frazzled, and instead of laying down as much as possible, what I've done is I just organize things, take a half hour, just clean up a little bit, organize things a little bit, and just pay attention to my physical surroundings. And I'm also focusing on making my bed every day and things like that. And those little things like that, of course, they're not the fulfillment of all things, but it just
but they make a huge difference. When you feel like there's order in your surroundings, there's so much mental space left to not have to worry about. You know what I mean? It's oh, that actually makes a big difference in my life. And I know I've been told to make my bed every day, and that would make a big difference in my life, but I didn't believe it, until you don't believe these things until you physically experience a change in your surroundings.
So going back to the scribes and Pharisees with the Old Testament law is, so one of the temptations for priesthood, I think it was the temptation for them, is this relationship between the minute details, the things that don't seem as important, and what is essential, the big picture. Because so on the surface, the Old Testament is very precise in how you do the sacrifices and things like this. And of course we have liturgical laws with the priest. And sometimes, not, some people would say that's really not that important. The most important thing is that you're loving, and those attention to details. For example, with the folding your hands, there's a correct way to fold your fingers over, from traditionally. And what I found is it's a delicate balance, and you have to keep what's essential in mind, so you can know how to make exceptions and how to roll with things and how to adapt to circumstances. But you also, that attention to detail can be incredibly helpful, even when you're not fulfilling the ideal. And I learned this with a lot of it, really got me thinking, was with the Latin Mass, because there's an incredible attention to detail with the Latin Mass, so much so that it's overwhelming at first. But then once you start to realize that the Institute priests were very helpful in this regard. They said, you're not going to get it all down. And I had to sit down with them. I'm not going to get all of this down. What is absolutely essential? Walk me through, let's create a hierarchy. What's most important? And I actually have to do this sometimes with people with confession, right? Because they do these longer examinations of conscience, which are great, but they feel overwhelmed, right? So I'll just kind of give you an example, a generic example. A person might be dealing with sexual sin. They might be dealing with not praying daily, but then they do this longer examination of conscience, and they're gossiping, they're using the Lord's name in vain. You go down a list of things, and you have to kind of sit back and say, look, you're not going to conquer all of this at once. Let's start with the big ones: sexual sins, and using Lord's name in vain and not praying daily. That would say those would be the big three that most people need to start off with, and going to mass on Sunday, right? Pray the rosary daily, read the Bible daily, work on chastity, and work on your not using the Lord's name in vain. That's like always a good place to start, right? And then once you've worked on those and are on the path to conquering them, then you can start to look at more of the detail.
Yeah.
And that's also the problem with the Pharisees. And Jesus points this out, is sometimes they get really wrapped around the axles about details that are not important. And then they ignore what he calls weightier parts of the law. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have some comments.
Oh, cool.
Right. Norma Jean Hare says, stopping by real quick. Pray for me, Father Ian and Alana. God bless you both. Y'all are in my prayers daily. Thank you so much, Norma.
Thanks so
Ryan Fisher's here. Good afternoon, party people. Great to see everyone. Glad I could join. It's good to see you, Ryan. Nancy Ware says, organizing does help. I agree, Father. And Ryan Fisher says, ugh, I have to make my bed now. Great. Yes, you do.
Make your bed every day. Have you heard those motivational speeches, right?
Yeah.
It does make
and also, I found out something called dishes math. It's crazy, but it's true. But not important.
What's
dishes?
That?
Dishes math. If you don't do your dishes every day, it multiplies exponentially in time of actually having to do your dishes. How long it takes to do your dishes if you procrastinate is exponentially longer than if you just do them. I know. I didn't believe it until I did it. It's true.
One habit I've gotten into recently is trying to measure how long something takes to understand it. Because, okay, I'll give you an easy example today. I had breakfast with the seminarian, and I was traveling back to the parish, and I had a road trip. I was like, I could save a ton of money if I went and bought 12 packs of drinks that I would have in my car with me on the road trip versus buying, at the gas station. So I was like, okay. And I was like, but I don't have the time. I'm in a hurry. Like, I wonder how long it would actually take if I pulled in and went. And I think I think it ended up taking 5 minutes. And then there was like seltzers that were on like sale.
Yeah.
And so I got a ton of seltzers for cheap. I'm like, and
for
all it took was
5 minutes. But in our heads, we make these, because going to the store usually is like multiple items, so it takes a lot longer. So in our heads, it's like, I don't have half an hour to go to the store or whatever, And then if you're stopping by on a road trip, it's every stop is like 15 minutes. It like puts you behind in time at least 15 minutes, even if you're only there for 3. So you save yourself some time. So
exactly. That's the irony, of course. I mean, that's the whole idea of like facing things immediately versus
right. Yeah. Because it tends to just build up and actually be more, the fear of the action and the suffering is worse than the actual action and the suffering usually. So, and then it builds up because you wait, because you're afraid, because there's some sort of
and I spent like $4 on the seltzer, and what inevitably would happen is I'd wait. I'd buy 2 drinks and a candy bar, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like $8, and then you do that like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
One trip, but I'm saying, like, over the course of. Whereas now I have all the seltzers there, and I just drink to my heart's content. Yeah.
And then you just have to pee all the time, but it's fine.
Exactly.
Just other consequences. But anyways, let's go to the second reading because it's time. So from Hebrews. Brothers and sisters, the Levitical priests were many because they were prevented by death from remaining in office. But Jesus, because he remains forever, has a priesthood that does not pass away. Therefore, he is always able to save those who approach God through him, since he lives forever to make intercession for them. It was fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, undefiled, separated from sinners, higher than the heavens. He has no need, as did the high priests, to offer sacrifice day after day, first for his own sins and then for those of the people. He did that once for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints men subject to weakness to be high priests, but the word of the oath, which is taken after the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. All right. So the law and the word.
One thing, so tying in with this, one of the things that's really missed, I think, with a lot of people, because I was actually, she might be tuning in, a friend who I've gotten to know. When she first saw me celebrating Mass at Orientum, she had a lot of questions and opened actually really beautiful conversations. And I talked about the Mass as a sacrifice, right? And so the way we would traditionally put it, so Protestants would say, look, Jesus made one sacrifice. We don't make any sacrifices anymore. And what we would say is that our sacrifices gain their merits by participating in the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. So that's how our sacrifice have merit. And so the idea is that Christ is the perfect sacrifice, and we join our sacrifices with the sacrifice of the Mass, which is the representation, the representation of the sacrifice on Calvary, where Christ is made present. His sacrifice is made present. Not that we re-sacrifice Jesus, of course, which is another Protestant critique. But I mean, getting at this idea of sacrifice and religion, you've probably heard this with your Thomistic stuff. The religion is the virtue. It's tied with sacrifice, that we owe God's sacrifice, and that the virtue of religion is offering sacrifice.
Right. The virtue of religion is underneath the virtue of justice. It is subsection of the virtue of justice, which is offering God his due, which is due worship towards God.
Exactly. Understood.
I might have been a little off with the wording, but that should be ish.
Yeah, no, that's pretty. No, I mean, I was like, I would be surprised if you were off. Yeah. But yeah. So a sacrifice and atonement. But did I tell you about the situation where a family that I'm friends with, they were going through a difficult pregnancy, and the baby was born a year ago. And I encouraged him to fast, pray the 7 penitential psalms, and pray a novena to Saint Magella, I think. I forget what one for patron saint of mothers. I forget the full name. I'd have to look it up. It's like Saint Magella or something Magella.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I'd heard about it because I'd heard a story once where a priest had done something similar for a family. And I kind of added on to it a little bit with this fasting and the penitential psalms, and he fasted for a few days. Yeah, it was pretty
cool.
But
my go-to is Monica.
There you go. But
result basis.
But this idea of how do you handle evil, physical evil or moral evil or whatever, is to offer sacrifice and atonement, and to plead God's mercy. Like that's I think that's still, I mean, that's prevalent throughout even the New Testament church and up until the Beatles. That's what I'm gonna start saying. The Beatles.
The Beatles. I think you mean the Boomers, but okay.
But anyways, but yeah, that sense of and offering prayer, it does change it. See, I would say, okay, I'm not saying that the idea of religion as relationship is completely flawed. It's not. There's multiple aspects to it, and the problem sometimes with the aspect that religion is simply about a relationship with God is that I take breaks from my relationships. If I have talked with somebody a lot, I can say, I could go a couple of weeks without talking to them, or I could, we could ease off the communication for a little while. And it's not like, like God, I need to hear from God every day and he needs to hear from me in that relational sense. There's that's partially true, but in a bigger sense, I'm required by justice to offer sacrifice. So even if I don't feel like it, I don't feel warm fuzzies, I feel nothing. Offering a sacrifice, the sacrifice of the Mass, rosary as a sacrifice.
Right.
Is good.
Well, and I would also counter that with the other end right? Because the virtue is the
Yeah.
mean of two extremes. The other extreme, which is that views religion as just following rules and no relationship, right?
Exactly.
So that's the two things that come together, right? To love your Lord, right, with all your heart, mind, and soul. Like that's still there as the commandment, right? There is the relationship that's important. Then also doing what's necessary, fulfilling the justice of, right worship, with the love, right? It's the both and that you hate so much when I say.
Yeah, that's all right. I'm rested. I'm in a better mood today. So.
Like it's kind of both and, but it's the mean, right? It's the mean of the virtue, it's in between the two extremes, because the two things are correct but not without each other. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, yes, relationship. And yes.
You didn't upset me with your both and now, because you fleshed it out first. Because sometimes you're like, I'm like, well, what are your thoughts? You're like, what's a both and? This is high school
okay,
again.
so I need to lead you into the both and. Okay.
I need you to explain in 500 words or more.
And like this is how you grow in relationship, is you say like, oh, I'll accept your both and if you give me your thesis first.
You flesh it out.
Yeah, flesh it out. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think, and bringing it back to like, we still have a priesthood that is made of men, right? That serves the Lord and fulfills and helps us on our behalf, fulfills that virtue of religion, that are weak, right? So there's also Jesus is the high priest, but we also have human priests that we have to pray for. Pray for your priests, pray for Father Ian, pray for all of the priests, everyone that's in formation, in vocations. We need them to fulfill this, and they need us to fulfill our duties as laity. And I really think that we talk about praying for priests a lot, but I don't necessarily think we talk about the other side also of like the laity need to fulfill their duties. And it's not just all on the priest. The priests can't change all the light bulbs, guys. Okay.
Back, because we just talked about it earlier.
Yeah. Bringing it back. All right, full circle.
All right, let's jump in the gospel.
Okay. Well, let me check, see if there's
might end a little early today because we're kind of on a roll.
Okay, we got some Saint Gerard Magella. Is that who?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, we got two people, Norma Jean and Roberto, who chatted that in on Facebook and on YouTube. So thank you guys. And Ginger says she's listening. So welcome everyone. And I'm going to go jump into the gospel now from Mark. One of the scribes came to Jesus and asked him, "Which is the first of all the commandments?" Jesus replied, "The first is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is Lord alone. You shall love your Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these." The scribe said to him, "Well said, teacher. You are right in saying he is one, and there is no other than he, and to love him with all your heart and with all your understanding and all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. It is worth more than all burnt offerings and sacrifices." And when Jesus saw that he answered with understanding, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And no one dared to ask him any more questions. Okay. Mm-hmm. I like that he.
It's funny that when I was younger, I would read this and I'd be like, that's it. I mean, because it's like he just said back what you were saying. Like, how is that so profound? But now, as I get older, I can appreciate now when you see that like light bulb moment in somebody and they kind of respond. And the way he responds, the is it a scribe? Who are we talking to again?
Yes, it's a scribe.
Yeah. When the scribe kind of responded back, he kind of added a little bit. He said it's worth more than burnt offerings and things like
And
that.
sacrifices.
So he kind of applied it a little bit. He's like, he understood it, right? So
right. And that the highest thing isn't right the sacrifice offered in the in the temple.
No.
It's these things. So you need to love your God and you need to love your neighbor. And then he's saying that this is worth more than all the burnt offerings and sacrifices. Not that the burnt offerings and sacrifices have no worth, because people are black and white, right? And they see, oh, so those aren't worth anything anymore. It just is worth, it has a higher value in reception, right? Loving your God and loving your neighbor as yourself is a high sacrifice as accepted by God.
Yeah. Did I ever tell you the story of how I calmed down about liturgy, where I became more understanding about liturgy and more patient with it?
When was this?
When I went to Mexico. So, and same time in Latin America, because before, my seminary was like a little bit more on the rigid side when it came to liturgy. There's a correct way of doing everything. And it wasn't the most relaxed environment in that regard. And I don't want to be too critical of my seminary, but I would say, I would not say I would recommend it for liturgical formation. There's a heavy emphasis placed on the rules. One thing, they didn't really explain the rules, and it wasn't like devotion was not as important. It was more about external conformity than devotion.
Oh, okay. So that's why. Okay.
Yeah. So I've just walked through this working with the Institute, because the Institute of Christ the King, which is funny because they're a Latin Mass group, you would think they would be more rigid, but actually there's a much healthier liturgical mindset. I don't know how to explain it, but it just felt a little healthier. They were all striving to do the liturgy better. Actually, they were probably even more attentive to details than St. Charles Borromeo. But my time there was much more pleasant than learning the Novus Ordo in a Novus Ordo.
Well, I think there's probably the focus on the intention behind the action and the why you're there to do it behind the action versus this needs to be the action, the end. Doesn't matter, like this is it. And when your desire is to do the liturgy better and better each time, your why is reverence, and then you're like, I'm teaching my body how to follow these rules, and you're more attention because your desire is rightly ordered.
Yeah. And it can be, if you embrace it in a proper spirit, it can be quite enjoyable to be attentive to the details in liturgy. It's hard to explain, but as I've been more focused,
just like sports.
Yeah.
Just like sports.
Exactly. Just like sports. And there's like you hit the sweet spot, the ball just flies off the bat kind of thing. Yeah. Not that I've ever really experienced that like with a home run or anything, but I get the idea. Because I've had that with soccer when you just hit it just right and it just boom, pops. Yeah. But so anyways, but with that, when I went to Mexico, rural Mexico is like a disaster liturgically, like just complete disaster, and you're just like, this is not at all even close to the rubrics of the Novus Ordo. But the thing was there was just a lot of devotion though. So it was, I don't want to idealize. They have very real problems. There's a lot of drug issues. There's the gangs, there's the drug cartels, and the drug cartels in that area have killed multiple priests. So it's a pretty intense environment. It was a really dangerous area. My mom really didn't want me to go. I didn't go officially with the diocese, by the way. I went through a couple of priests of our diocese. And then spending that time being like, seeing, for example, when we were in the mountains of Honduras once, a woman who looked worse shape than my grandparents ever looked, rail thin. She walked like 5 miles to go to the mass because it was the one time she had to go to mass, and you're like, okay,
yeah.
People, it's interesting because I've used this recently, and I'm going to start using it more when people don't like to kneel because it's uncomfortable. Like that's a common thing sometimes when we're in the South and we have liturgies where there's not kneelers or whatever.
Okay.
What I do is I do the Mexico style, which is you kneel from the epiclesis to the memorial acclamation, because in Mexico, in rural Mexico, there are no kneelers.
Mm.
And these little old ladies, they're like 80 years old, and they kneel on cement floor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's, of course, the devout women who like will kneel the whole mass, because it's a little bit all over the place liturgically. So there's people who kneel even during the readings and stuff. That's kind of they're not as big on uniformity as we are in America.
Yeah.
America, we're very big on, one of our priests once said, they said, when he was in Rome, he said, the Roman view of the Americans is we're obsessed with choreography, is what he put it. Like everybody has to do the same thing. We like uniformity in liturgy more than most cultures.
And I think that transfers also over to the Latin Mass. People who are at the Latin Mass like things to be the way they expect them to be, and people to be the same in doing it.
But the thing is, with the Latin Mass, there's not clear rubrics on what you should be doing as the laity.
Mm-hmm.
So technically, there's a lot of room for interpretation.
Yeah.
But
that's not necessarily their opinion.
Exactly. And that's what was that was part of the reforms of Vatican II that they said in Sacrosanctum Concilium, was that there'd be greater attention to the rubrics for the people. Mm-hmm. But yeah, who's also not big on uniformity like that is the Orthodox. They don't all wear the same color vestments at their mass. I've only seen one mass that they'll have every year. There's only one mass where they all wear the same color. Can you guess what it is? Actually, maybe two or three. One for certain.
Is it Easter?
Close. Pentecost.
Oh,
they all wear green. They all wear green for Pentecost.
Green.
But yeah, they wear green. And
I lost.
Oh, did you break up?
You said they all wear green. What'd you say?
I said any other part of the year they could be wearing multiple different colors. Look it up. Orthodox. Yeah. And I saw this one liturgy where, no joke, there's 5 priests and they're wearing 4 different colors.
Well, that's the thing, is like it's so interesting to think about worship and like right worship and details versus devotion. You know what I mean? Both are important.
Yeah.
Both are necessary. And we can really, really, really get focused on one and lose the other, and that's still damaging to us.
Yeah.
Like really balancing, like be as devotion and as detail oriented as possible, like without being so hyper, like aware where it makes it a burden, right? It's not a burden, it's love. But it's love in terms of those two things, it's integrated, right? Exactly. You worship with integrity, which is there's devotion, there's forgiveness in detail situations, right? It allows you to be flexible in that way.
Exactly.
Because the heart's in the right place, and you want to do the right motions and
well, that's exactly, and that's where Jesus himself kind of alludes to this in other parts, where he talks about I think it's when he cures on the Sabbath, and he talks about David, how he ate the showbread, right? That was a well-formed priest, right? He was like, okay, the showbread normally is not eaten, this is kind of an emergency situation, I'm going to break the law, I'm going to break the liturgical law for the sake of a higher good. And it's not a significant part of the law, but but he's not like, it's not willy-nilly, I'm just going to break the law whenever.
Right. And it's not like it's okay to break the law now. It's not like it's there is an order in the hierarchy of goods, and there's the transcendent good, right? That we strive for, and when our desire is rightly ordered and we integrate the details and everything, I really feel like it comes together in a more natural, integrated way that is authentic, right? And that's really what we want. We want authentic worship. Exactly. That's like, people are desiring that, and they're trying to find it, and it's like, okay, where do I go to find what my heart really desires? You know what I mean? Even if we can't verbalize that, like I desire devotion and I desire these details, because it comes together with this
Well, and the
right
the
worship.
details, when the details are intentional, and,
Right.
and is the I thought about this when one thing I've focused on doing in my apartment is like my shoes. When I take off like my running shoes and I have my shoes in my bedroom, it takes 3 seconds, and really it's not important. But I always put my shoes in the proper place and don't just leave them in the middle of the floor. And really, but I've noticed that when you attend to little details like that, I was explaining it to one student. It's not just because when I was younger, it was always about cleaning your room. But
Mm-hmm.
I've thought about it more recently, maybe just because I like to make things deeper than they are, is bringing order out of chaos. It's like before it was just my shoes and all that were thrown randomly, but now they're placed intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And when there's all this order around you, like taking like a stack of papers and making sure they're neatly stacked or in proper order,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
ordering the chaos.
We pretend like we like chaos and don't want to be told what to do, but normally stress level wise, we actually really prefer order and a
Yeah.
lot less chaos. But we've been told since we were little, you know what I mean, that we're rebels and whatever. It's a lie. We've been lied to, guys. Organized stuff.
Exactly.
We don't need as many things as we think we need. Our culture is a consumable culture. We need to get out of that. It's probably happening now without our, whatever, because it's chaos. But bring some order into your life. It will make a huge difference in terms of stress and anxiety and even possibly depression. So
Absolutely. I think it's a good place to leave on because I am tired. I had a long week, Newman week. I need a little.
He needs to go organize some things because he's tired and he's not going to take.
I'm at my parents' house, so I can't. I could organize their stuff.
All right, well, I guess take it now. Natasha Dunn says, "Thank you both for what you do. Well appreciated." Thank you, Natasha.
Thanks, Natasha.
Yeah, let's say some prayers.
And Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, Heavenly Father, we pray in a special way for all who will watch or listen to this, for Norma, who chimed in. Pray for our college students when we just had Newman Week. I pray for a few friends that are in the hospital that are having complications for my parishioners. We pray also for Lana and her family, for her parish, for her friend circle. We ask you to bless all who will watch or listen to this. Benedicta vos omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus. Amen.
Amen. Have